So you're in charge of administering your parents' trust. Now, on the surface, it might seem like you're in pretty good shape, right? Because you've heard, and hopefully from this show, that having a trust helps you avoid probate. And that makes the process very simple, right? But it's not immediate. And that's what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about the steps you need to be aware of on how to administer the trust and why it's not as simple as many people often think. Welcome in. Glad to have you on the show once more. This is Complete Estate Planning with Nick Rosenbauer. Nick, we are closing in on the end of the year. I know the holiday season is upon us. You guys are going to be pretty busy. I know at the office you're going to be staying pretty busy, but you have some time to travel or at least enjoy some time with family.
Yeah, so we don't do a lot of traveling during the holidays, apart from the load the kids up in the back of the SUV, right, and take them to everyone's house and all the, and Ben, you're probably in this as well, where all the kids have they have like a little school, like concert, where you got to go to and everything like that. So we have a whole lot of extracurricular activities. It'll be fun. The kids are at the age where it's cute. There becomes a point where it's not, but right now they're still there. And then we are, the one nice thing I will say about my extended family and my wife's is they're okay. We do some of our extended family Christmases not on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve. So that has been good. When my wife and I first got married, we had like 6 places to go, within 48 hours. And that's been a nightmare. I'm sure you've done something similar at least once and then said, hell no, never again. So we have a lot, but it's spread out. It's not a chaotic, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It'll be fun. And we're just trying not to get the kids sick every week, maybe at least have like 1 week of runny nose and then 1 week of health. So if we can get that ratio, we'll be in good shape. And it's a fun age, obviously, for Christmas. They're 3 and 6. My kids are jacked for Christmas.
Same.
I'm sure you're dealing with a whole lot of high energy and impatience, because I'm sure we weren't like that when we were kids at all, right?
No, of course not. No, it's a fun time of the year for sure. I know it is busy, and I know you guys are still busy around the Rosenbauer law office as well, and that's kind of what led to the conversation today. And I think this is going to be a good one because I would probably be guilty of this too. I haven't gone through this process. I haven't had to administer a trust, but having talked with you for a while and kind of understanding the ease that a trust allows compared to having to go through probate, right? Seems like, okay, trust, everything's taken care of. If someone passes away, everything's the orders and plans are clear. I get my inheritance and we move on. Yeah. And while things are simpler, it's not that easy, right?
Exactly. So it is. Well, and here's the thing. There's still obviously work to be done, but when you think about it, and we'll talk about today, our listeners will say, geez, that was the easy version. Well, that, imagine if we had to do all that under the purview of, the county probate court. So, so it is not as difficult or arduous as if you have to go through probate process, but it is not instantaneous, right? It's not something where everyone's going to get their inheritance check a week after the funeral. There are still steps that need to be done, I's that need to be dotted, T's that need to be crossed. It's a little bit different, and we'll kind of break down that for you, not to scare you or anything like that, but just to, I think it's good to have an awareness that work needs to be done, and, don't be telling your siblings, hey, well, you'll have, if, and by the way, today we're recording the day before Thanksgiving. So if someone passed away today, as the trustee, you better not be telling your siblings, oh yeah, I'll have this money to you in time for Black Friday shopping, right? So a lot of it's managing expectations. And again, we'll go through the specifics here, but once they start counting on, hey, I'll have the money by Black Friday, it's a whole lot harder to walk that back. So we'll kind of walk through the details here, just so you have an idea of what needs to be done, so you don't have any unrealistic expectations, and you don't give the rest of the family any unrealistic expectations. Because when they're hounding you, hey, when do I get my money? When do I get my money? That never goes well, and that puts strain on the relationship.
Yeah. Well, if you have questions as we go through this, again, I always encourage you to reach out to Nick. 513-463-6789 is the number. And you can find everything online at CincinnatiEstatePlan.com. You can also schedule a meeting there at CincinnatiEstatePlan.com. All right, before we get into these key steps we're going to take you through today in this video on trust administration, let's just start with kind of the background on this, because I think a lot of people have listened to the show before, or maybe done a little research about this, maybe understand why trust provides some shortcuts compared to probate, but give us the high level on why that happens and how that happens.
Right, exactly. Well, the trust is privately administered, and it is not administered through the county probate court. So that's really the one sentence spiel on it. But but there's a lot of things, little details that kind of go with that. So we don't have any court filings. So all the work we do, we still have to settle things, but we don't need to wait for hearings. We don't need to wait for approval by the county probate judge. We don't have to wait. There's certain steps in the probate process that by law are required to wait a certain time period. Creditors, et cetera, are given a certain notice. So it's interesting, because I tell people, even in situations where we have all the paperwork, it's nice and simple, and let's say I tell them, I said, even if I took this paperwork and I walked it to the probate court today, and the probate judge just happened to be there available, we could not, finalize and process all of this today. So all of those delays and seeking approval from the judge, in addition to the work that needs to be done, all of that is gone. We don't have to worry about that. And there's no delay for access either. So, if the trust is funded or pays to the trust, whoever the trustee is has the authority, has the ability to access and manage things right now. So there's no delay from that standpoint. So all of that leads to, faster, less headache, but it does not mean it's instantaneous, where you wave a magic wand and then everything, just magically evaporates and the inheritance goes out. There's still things that need to be done, though. There are still laws that need to be followed. The rules of the trust need to be followed. There's investment obligations, tax, legal obligations that can't be skipped. So even though we don't have to get the probate judge's blessing and wait on these things, it does not mean that there's no liability, there's no rules that need to be followed, or there's no work that needs to be done. It's just, we don't have to do all the work we're going to do. We don't need to, get the blessing at the county probate court in order to do it.
Okay, very good. All right, well, let's jump into these key steps and kind of help paint the picture for what to expect and kind of what to know ahead of time before this. So again, it's all about setting those expectations. So let's walk through those.
So start off, there are, notice, information, kind of sharing information, disclosure requirements. Even though we don't have to file things in court and they don't have to be public record, that does not mean you can hide all the information from the actual beneficiaries. Most states require, the trustee to provide certain information to the beneficiaries. Hey, you've been named as a beneficiary of the trust, that you're up to bat, so to speak, because, if you're not a current beneficiary, like, to give you an example, my wife and I, our estate plan, eventually there's money set aside to take care of our kids, right? But not yet. That's not until we die. So my kids are not current beneficiaries. They're in line after we're gone. I don't need to notify my kids of anything. But once we die, whoever's in charge, and if the kids are underage, they notify the guardian. Then they have to notify them, hey, there's a trust that was set up. You've been named as a beneficiary, and it is now your turn in line. And you also have to give information about what you're inheriting, a copy of the trust document, and then what your rights are. So the beneficiary has a right to examine certain things, request certain information, and, file, if they think there's funny business, any sort of a challenge or something like that. So they're entitled to certain information. It is not a situation of the trustee says, well, I don't have to tell you what you're inheriting. That's not the case. So obviously information needs to be shared. States are different on that. And I think, and some of the nuances, and not to get too far into the weeds here, Ben, but there are certain things where you have to affirmatively just give them this information. And there's other things where you don't have to offer it up front, but the minute someone asks for it, you can't tell them no. And that varies by state, and that varies by the type of document or type of information. So one, you have to keep people informed. And Ben, one of the reasons that beneficiaries have such a built into the law itself protection, because, the beneficiaries are protected extremely well as far as being able to access information, because there's no probate judge who's overseeing this. Okay, so we don't have a probate court who is policing this. So the only one who can police this is the family, the beneficiary themselves. So if you're not going to have a third party probate judge policing it, that's what you have to do. And then you have to deal with the stuff. You have to deal with the assets. Whether we go to court or not, you still have to secure the assets, find out what there is. Is there a house? Is there a bank account? Are there digital assets? Is there crypto? Is there a business? Is there a nice set of golf clubs? That's probably overpriced. I don't know about you, but I vomit every time I go into a golf store, and new drivers are $650, and fairway woods now are what new drivers used to be.
Oh, no, yeah.
It is nuts. So I tell my wife, because I got a new set of irons earlier this year that I've been waiting to get fitted for years. I said, you have no idea how much money I saved, because 3 years from now, the cost on these is going to double. So I got in early. But again, you have to find out what it is. You have to deal with it. Make sure assets are properly titled to the trust. So there's a funding audit that needs to be done, because it's not in the trust. It's not under the trustee's control. Maybe something has to be probated, so you have to figure that out. And then obviously just physically securing things. Make sure the house is locked, right? And then set those timers to where the lights come on. You don't want the house to look vacant, because physically you have to protect this stuff. Put the car in the garage so it doesn't get broken into. And make sure that insurance doesn't lapse. You'll have to notify State Farm or Allstate that the person's passed away, certainly, but you don't want the insurance to lapse and then the pipes burst, and then, there's $40,000 of damage in the basement. Okay, so it's your job to find out the assets, take stock of them, and keep them safe. And then you need to get valuations on that too. Real estate, investments, financial accounts, all of the assets that really have a tangible value at all. Date of death value is what you're looking for, mostly for tax purposes, but also for anything that is not being sold and is being, the term is distributed in kind. You need to make sure you have that valuation so there's fair distribution. So Ben, if you're supposed to get $10,000, right? And you said, you know what? I really want Nick's new set of irons. Those are those Mizunos are pretty, and I'm also, I'm also, 2 degrees upright, and I just, everything's perfect. Those were made for me. Well, we need to find out what that's worth. So if you're supposed to get $10,000, if the irons are worth $1,000, that's different than if they're worth 500. So we had to get the right value to understand that, hey, you get $1,000 worth of golf clubs and $9,000 worth of money. So that's important. Obviously, if you're selling everything, when you sell it, the price will be the price. And it's much easier to distribute cash because everything is money, and money is very easy to tell what the value is, right? You just look at the bank statement and then you get out your calculator. But you got to be careful with stuff. So that needs to be dealt with. Now, sometimes, Ben, obviously we have stuff, we have money, we have the good, but sometimes you run into debts or bills or expenses. Right. If there's a mortgage on the house, you got to contact the mortgage company. If you don't pay the mortgage for 6 months, there's going to be problems. They'll file foreclosures. They're not going to let someone not pay the mortgage because someone passed away. The alarm system. Okay, they'll turn the alarm system off. They'll turn the electric off if the bills don't get paid. So all that still needs to get dealt with. And then in addition to that, this has gotten harder because it used to be, Ben, you would just check the mailbox for 90 days. And I would say, bring every envelope you got. And they'd put them all over our conference table. And we'd find all the accounts, all the bills. eStatements and not sending a paper bill really screws us over in the initial treasure hunting for probate. So it's tough. You got to be really careful about that. And what the legitimate debts are. If you don't pay the car, if you don't make the car payment, they'll come repo the car. So you have to kind of take stock of that. And I will say the mail and now really checking bank account and credit card statements is really the best way to get a ledger on all of that. It's not as easy as it used to be. But usually if you get the bank account and credit card statement from the last 90 days, you can find most of it. But again, Ben, these are all things that need to be done, even if we don't have to go through the probate process. It's not as if we don't have to do this. We have to do it. We just don't have to get the court's blessing before we make any moves. Okay. Mm-hmm. One other thing to be careful of is our friend Uncle Sam and the IRS. So taxes still need to get filed. This is an odd one that people, it kind of catches them off guard.
Okay.
But the person who passed away, their final income tax return still needs to be filed. You don't get to make a whole bunch of money all year and then die on December 29th, and then you don't have to pay any income tax. The IRS, dying does not get you out of paying income tax.
No, we got debt to pay off.
Yeah. So the final tax return needs to be done. If the assets produce income in the in-between period, so let's say you have a whole bunch of stock or rental properties after you pass away, it's still collecting rent, dividends, then the income, or the rent or the capital gains, et cetera, between date of death and when the money's inherited, those have to be accounted for. So the estate or the trust would have to file usually a one-off tax return to deal with all of that. So again, you have to be careful about that. And it's not always easy to understand what the tax liabilities are. So Ben, if your parents pass away, unless you're the one doing their taxes every year, you probably have no way of knowing, geez, do they get a refund every year? Do they owe money? Is this year going to be different? So you're checking the mail, you're checking the bank statements, you're waiting for the tax forms at the beginning of the year. You got to be careful about this, because if you distribute all the money and then you find out next January with all these tax forms that, your parent owed the IRS 40 grand, they will come after who's ever in charge of the estate. And it'll be up to you to call your siblings and say, "Hey guys, can you bring some money back at Easter? I got to pay the IRS," right? So be careful about that. So you want to deal with all of that. And then the biggest thing here, obviously, Ben, you're keeping as good of records as you can. You are transactions, receipts, bank statements, and you have to find all this stuff. Even if you don't have to go to court, you still have to hunt it down, find out what banks they used. You'll probably want to get access to their email, their phone, their bank statements and credit card statements. So even though we don't have to go to court, that does not magically mean that PNC is going to send you a letter saying, "Hey, I know your parents died. I saw you were in charge. They had an account here, just so you have a heads up." Okay. So a lot of that is very, very, the process is basically the same, except we don't need to get the judge's okay on anything. But there's still, you can see how there's still work to be done on this. And there's certain problems that are not solved by that. So again, you have to be really, really careful. Eventually, you do get to the fun point where it's time to make the inheritance distribution to everyone. It's good to make sure that you know all the assets, you know all the debts, you know all the taxes, and all of that is known up front. Like, you don't want to start giving out money only to find out later, that there are $40,000 in back taxes that hasn't been filed. So you want everything in front of you. And then you also, you make sure you have everything in front of you. You make sure all the beneficiaries have given, have received all the information they're required to, all the notices, copy the trust. So you're following all of the rules, and you've dotted all your I's, crossed all your T's. And then, you're making the distributions, you're following the rules of the trust. And sometimes that's straightforward, write checks. And this is something we've talked about as well, Ben. But if you have minors or people where there's holdback provisions, then you're not writing a check, you're holding on and kind of managing the money long-term in accordance with the inheritance. So, and again, that's just, the trust will tell you what to do once you get there. But there's a lot of interim steps that are easier without going to probate, but it does not mean that they're skipped.
I will say, Nick, I mean, we talked about it a lot here on the show about the trust planning, and, I didn't expect there to be this long of a list of things. It does seem a little overwhelming for someone that maybe is not familiar with that, which I could see, if this gets sprung on you and it's a big surprise, maybe it's pretty difficult. Do you have anybody helping you out with this if you are the person in charge of the trust?
Good question. So unlike probate, where a lot of times you can't even get started, even if you wanted to, without hiring an attorney, you are not legally required to hire an attorney. But I will tell you, it's a good idea. Even if you don't need them at the way you would need someone like us, if there was a probate where you basically hire us to do all of the work for you, it's probably good to have some help, even some guidance. So we actually offer, for our clients who pass away, we offer, I wouldn't call it a reading of the will. It's never as dramatic as it sounds on TV, but we offer a free meeting with whoever's in charge to walk through, here's what they did, here's the notes we had on where they banked, here's how the inheritance looks, here's what you need to do. And then a lot of times they will ask us for some assistance. Do they need us to call around and get a CPA? No. Do they usually need us to call a bunch of realtors and find the best one? No. But a lot of times they'll have us help kind of go through the legalese, and here's the rights and the notices you have to give the beneficiaries, the disclosures. And then it's more of a, kind of a sounding board. So, hey, yep, we'll do step 1, step 2, step 3. Once you get to this point, let me know. We'll take a look at it. We'll run all the numbers, and then I'll give you the all clear to release the money. So not legally required, but we are kind of, we a lot of times are more of a consultant or a guide, as opposed to with a probate where it's you get us the information and we're really taking that burden on ourselves. So it's usually a limited need for us. But that way people, like you said, are not kind of left high and dry, to study the trust code on their own and violate a rule that they didn't even know exists. So do not, I'm not saying you will need professional assistance to the same way you would for a probate, but that does not mean you are left all on your own to fend for yourself and you have no help or no assistance. That's not the case. So lean on the professionals. Obviously, if you know the person who did the plan, that's a good place to start. But if you don't like that person, or they're retired, we do a lot of work for people who they are our clients, but maybe their parents passed away and had an old plan from a long time ago. So they say, well, we know you, we don't know the old attorney who may be retired. So we've helped people with that. So it's something to be aware of. Don't feel overwhelmed. It's not as bad as you would think, but there are certain things where it's much better to know all the boxes we have to check on the front end versus inadvertently screwing something up and then trying to fix it a year later when we get some surprise tax forms and all the money's gone.
All right. Good information, really thorough breakdown here on what to expect administering that trust. And if you're in this position, need help, please don't hesitate to reach out to Nick. CincinnatiEstatePlan.com is the website. You'll see the option right there on the front of the website to schedule a call with Nick and begin talking about some of these things. And if you are looking to put a trust in place, that is a great opportunity to do so. Take that next step now to go ahead and start securing your future and your family's future as well. All right, we'll get out of here on that note. Thanks for being a part of Complete Estate Planning. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're back again soon. Nick, have a happy Thanksgiving. We'll talk to you in a week.
Thanks, you too, and same to all our listeners. We'll see you next time.
Are you feeling overwhelmed by estate planning? The process can seem complex, but it doesn't have to be. The Rosenbauer Law Office is dedicated to helping you protect what matters most: your family, your assets, and your peace of mind. Nick and the team will guide you through every step of the process, making sure you feel confident and informed along the way. Take the first step toward peace of mind today. Schedule an introductory call by clicking the link in the description of today's show.
This show is for informational purposes only and does not provide any legal advice. Information on this show may not constitute the most up-to-date legal information. Please do not act or refrain from acting based solely on anything you hear on this show. This show does not form any attorney-client relationship with the Rosenbauer Law Office, LLC. Please seek the counsel of a qualified attorney before addressing your own estate planning needs.